My name is Savoy Chocho, and working together with the educational team at the Zambia Institute of Marketing, I will show you how students could have approached questions in this paper. Question number 1A. Distinguish between retrenchment and redundancy in an employment relationship. Let me give you a situation, an actual example, a very relevant example. Up to the year 2018, I was employed at MultiChoice Zambia, as digital media support specialist. That was my role. Earlier on, before 2018, the company had begun making changes to its operations, and some of the things that I was doing were moved to South Africa. It therefore meant that my role became redundant. This means that the role was of no more use. If you want to put it, you can say useless. The role becomes useless. Redundancy refers to a situation where there is loss of employment. There is loss of employment owing to the fact that a particular role is no longer required. Role no longer required. So the term redundancy itself is an English word which means of no more use. And so what happens is that a business may no longer need the role of digital media support specialist. A company may no longer need cashiers because customers are now paying online. It therefore means that the role of the cashier is useless. It becomes useless. It becomes redundant. So redundancy therefore refers to a loss of employment because the role is no longer needed. What companies do is that when a role is redundant, they look for elsewhere where an employee can be redeployed. For example, they could move you from auditing to, say, cashiering. But in the event that there is nowhere where an individual employee can be moved, it therefore means that the employee is going to be retrenched. So retrenchment also is a loss of employment, mostly because of financial problems that an organization can face. Financial problems, because a company can face financial problems despite the very fact that the company is still going on with its operations. But you see, the aim is to reduce how much money is paid to members of staff. And so the company then is going to retrench members of staff, meaning those members of staff are going to lose their jobs. So the difference really is that with one, which is redundancy, yes, this is redundancy, it is the role that becomes redundant, not exactly the individual. And therefore the individual and their skills can be redeployed elsewhere within the operations of the business. Whereas when it comes to retrenchment, it refers to a loss of employment because there's just no more need and there's nowhere where the company can take you. And so this is how students needed to attend to this particular question, to really just explain what retrenchment is and explain what redundancy is. And you'd get your 10 marks. Maybe not exactly 10 marks because, no one always gets everything, but you'd get a substantial amount of marks for answering, like I have explained, using your own different examples and giving the principles as they are. Let's now turn to B. It's long, but let's read it together. Jen works. No, let me start again. That was not correct. Let's start again. Jen offers to work for Galagata as a secretary in a printing and photocopying business in Kawata Market. Galagata promises to pay her a salary of 3,500 kwacha every month. However, Galagata's wife, Mbangweta, is not happy with Jen and would have preferred a male in her place. While Galagata is away attending a trade show in Ndola, Mbangweta goes to the shop and asks for money from Jen. Jen refuses, arguing that this money belongs to the business and is not for personal use. Mbangweta dismisses Jen immediately, but Jen refuses to go, claiming she was not employed by Mbangweta. Mbangweta reports the matter to Kawata police and solicits for help to have Jen arrested for insubordination. This employment-related dispute has been brought to your attention as a student of marketing with knowledge on employment law. Identify all relevant legal issues and demonstrate how you would settle the misunderstanding. This is a very interesting one. But before I get into the details of this particular question, you do appreciate that question 1A was about employment. Redundancy and retrenchment relates to employment. And question B also relates to employment. In your study of this particular subject, employment law is one of those that you're going to deal with. Follow me carefully. Employment law. Employment law. And under employment law, the following are what you need to cover. You need to cover number 1, the nature of an employment agreement. Nature of employment agreement. Alright, let me just correct that. Nature of employment agreement. That's one of the topics that you need to know, you need to cover. Number 2, express and implied terms. Express and implied terms. Implied terms. Number 3 is going to be on duties and responsibilities. Duties and responsibilities of employers and employees. Very important. Number 4, you also need to cover the differences between an independent contractor, and an employee. Number 5, you need to cover a topic on redundancy and retrenchment. Redundancy and retrenchment. Redundancy and retrenchment. And number 6, you need to cover on termination of employment. Once you've covered these 6, you should be comfortable with attempting any question that will come on the exam that relates to employment law. If you need help in business law, feel free to get in touch. The details are on the screen. Sawoi Chocho is my name, and I'll be happy to take you through. I studied marketing and I also have a law degree, so I really do know what to take you through. Let's get back to this particular situation. To summarize it, Jen works for Galagata. Mbangweta, who is Galagata's wife, is not happy with Jen. She would have loved that the husband employed a male. Yeah, maybe because she wants to see men with muscles and big voices. We don't know why she wanted to be like that. So now she's not happy with Jen. Galagata goes away, and Mbangweta says, now I'm going to fix her. Let me go to the shop, and when I'm there, I'm going to ask for money. And she goes there and asks for money. Jen refuses and says, I cannot give you this money. It's for the business. It's not for you to go and do makeup and your hair and all that kind. Mbangweta gets upset and she says, I am firing you right now. You are fired. Jen stands up and says, Kwisa, shireya. I am not going anywhere. You are not the one who employed me. It is your husband. Mbangweta gets upset. She goes to Kawata police and reports Jen for insubordination. Insubordination is disrespect or disregard of instructions by someone who is senior to you in an organization. And so there's a problem here. There really is a problem. The question says, what we're required to do is to identify all the relevant legal issues and demonstrate how you would settle the misunderstanding. So there is a problem here. And now let's deal with this particular problem first. Let's identify what the problems are. Number one, employer. These are the legal issues. We're identifying the legal issues. Employer is Galagata. Galagatas. Galagata. Not Mbangweta. At least that's what we've been told in the case. If Jen was employed as a couple, not as a couple. If Jen was employed by both Mbangweta and Galagata as a couple, then yes, she would be responsible. She would be duty bound to report to either of them. But we've been told clearly that in this particular case, it is only Jen and Galagata. So this is the issue number one. Now, so it therefore means that number two, insubordination does not apply. Insubordination does not apply. Why? Because insubordination only applies to someone whom you report into. And you only report into your employer. You don't report into a third person. You see, it reminds me of a time when a friend of mine at a different company was going home late. And the husband was upset and the husband went to her boss. It was useless. It was her. It was the wife that was employed, not the husband. So in a contract, the parties are specific. Number three, this issue is not a criminal issue. It's not a criminal matter. The police only come in to consider criminal matters. This is a civil case. This is not even a case. This is a civil matter. And so these are the issues here. Number four, by the way, there's also dismissal. Only the employer can dismiss an employee. It's not the union leaders. It is not the politicians. It is only the employer that can dismiss. Okay? Only the employer can dismiss. Only can be dismissed by the employer. Mbangweta na problem yake na wamuna wake. Afunga kwa sotinga. How then can this issue be resolved? Because there's two parts in this particular question. How can this issue be resolved? Okay, so A. If Galagata would like, it means that what can happen is that in this particular case, the husband and wife can come up with what's known as a partnership deed, in which two people are employing one person. Okay? Then that can sort out the issue. So it means that then Jen can report into Mbangweta and Galax, Galacta, Galagata. That is number one. Number two, another way in which the issues here could be can be resolved is when you need to have a clear what do you call that? You need to have a clear job description. Job description, and C, I almost said number C. Number C, there must be policies, including company or business guidelines, because you just can't walk up to someone and because they refuse to give you money, you fire them. There must be a provision for warnings, a provision for having disciplinary hearings so that both sides of the story are considered. So these are some of the ways in which you would consider in which you would resolve this particular issue. 10 marks for you. Okay. How much did you get? Did you attempt this question, or would you have attempted this question? Remember that when it comes to employment law, the areas that you mainly need to cover are the nature of an employment agreement. You also need to cover express and implied terms. You need to know and understand duties and responsibilities of employers and employees. You need to appreciate and understand the differences between independent contractors and employees. This is where the concept of employment contract for service and contract of service comes in. You need to know that. Let me write it down. You need to know the difference between contract for service and contract of service. To continue, you need to appreciate redundancy and retrenchment, and you need to know and understand termination of employment. So this is how students needed to attend to this particular question, and you would have gotten 18 marks or so, 16, 17, 18 marks by answering it the way I have given it to you. Of course, you need to write it down properly and explain your points comprehensively, but ideally this is how it needed to be done. My name is Savoy. Feel free to get in touch with me if you need help in your studies. Contact details are on the screen. Let's move on to question number 2. This one here. And question number 2A, define subsidiary legislation and discuss 2 disadvantages it has in real life. Okay, all right. So, like you already know, legislation is a process. Legislation, okay, is the process of coming up with laws. Process of coming up with laws. Coming up with laws. That is what legislation means, with laws. And who is primarily responsible for legislation? It is Parliament. Parliament is the one that is primarily responsible for legislation. However, Parliament does not sit and discuss each and every item. They do not have the time for that. Imagine them sitting to discuss people that urinate on trees. You leave that to other people. And so what Parliament does is that the law allows for what is known as delegated legislation. This delegated legislation is also what is known as subsidiary legislation. Okay, same thing. Delegated legislation, subsidiary legislation, same thing. It means Parliament, through the legal establishments, allows for other identified persons to be able to come up with laws. Okay, examples of these persons include the councils. And so the councils come up with bylaws. Also, you have ministers. Ministers, statutory instruments. Have you heard of statutory instruments? Some say SI. Statutory instruments. These are examples of subsidiary legislation. Therefore, subsidiary legislation refers to the process of coming up with laws by other specifically identified persons other than Parliament. The disadvantages are that, number one, whoever it is that can come up with that particular law may exceed their limit. I'm not sure if limit is the correct word. Let me say authority. Yes, they can exceed their authority. And I'll give you an example. There was a time when I think the Minister of Local Government that time was Ben Tentamashimba. Yes, some years back. And he was the Minister of Local Government. So what he did was he issued a statutory instrument to move the mayoral elections. I think that was it. Yes, that must have been the situation. However, he had no authority to do that, and he was taken to court, and the court found that his decision to move the mayor elections was illegal. Mayor or council elections. You see, so there's a disadvantage that the person who has been given this particular authority can actually exceed their limit. Or not limit their authority. Okay, number two is that there's a possibility that there can be too many subsidiary laws. The risk of having too many subsidiary laws that they may affect the normal order of business. That can affect the normal order of business. That can negatively affect the normal operations of business. Okay. So those are some of the two disadvantages of of delegated legislation. So 10 marks for you. Need help with your studies? Details are on the screen. Feel free to get in touch. I'll be happy to help you in your studies. Let's move on to B. B says, explain briefly the 5 stages of reading the bill in Parliament. Yes, reading the bill in Parliament. Bill 10, there's Bill 10. If you're following what's happening with Bill 10 in the country, you should then be able to answer this question way much easily, because everyone's talking about Bill 10. Okay? I'm not going to say anything about it. Read for yourself and make up your own minds. So the steps that are followed in this particular process, you just look, when a law does not come just boom, no, it goes through certain stages. And these stages are, number 1, there is the first reading. There is the first reading. Number 1, there is first reading. First reading. Number 2, if there's first reading, then there's going to be second reading. Second reading. After the second reading, there is what is known as the committee stage. The committee stage. Number 4, there's then what is known as the report stage. Number 5, third reading. Yeah. Number 5, third reading. Third reading. So these are the stages of reading the bills. Stages of reading the bills. These 5. First, you have the first reading. That sounds funny, right? Like first, you have the first reading. All right, so there's the first reading, and this is just, where the title of the bill is read and the date is set for the second reading. It's an official, so the House, which is Parliament, they are informed about this particular bill. At the second stage, the bill is subjected to debate. After these debates, a committee is put in place, or one that already exists, to further look into the issues of this particular bill. The committee then is going to come up with a report. And this report is going to make suggestions of or recommendations of what changes to be made to the bill. Then there is the third reading, where the bill is going to be brought back for further debate and anything else that may be related to that particular bill before it is voted for and it goes to the president for assent. So this is then what you needed to do to get your 20 marks. You would have gotten at least 18 marks or so. So ideally then you probably would have 18 from question 1 and 18 from question 2. Therefore you have 6 there, 3. 36 points, marks. You see, it's very easy to pass these exams as long as you know what to read, what to cover, and as long as you also cover. And I mean, as long as you read. Need help with your studies? Get in touch. My details are on the screen. I'll be happy to take you through. See you in the next video.